Welcome to the 3B1B podcast. I'm Grant Sanderson. Today my conversation is with Sal Khan, a man who hardly needs any introduction. He's probably best known as the founder and voice behind Khan Academy, which has got to be one of the most successful online education platforms ever. I mean, he has put out literally thousands of videos on just about any topic that anyone could want to learn in school. Not only was Khan Academy a huge inspiration to me in terms of setting this precedent for the role that online explanations could serve, some listeners might know that I actually used to work for Khan Academy, so honestly I owe a lot of my career to some of the people that I met there, and just being in an environment of so many like-minded folks, to include Sal Khan himself. But as influential as Khan Academy is, for this conversation, I wanted to focus on a couple different projects that Sal has worked on that not as many people might know about, including Schoolhouse.world, which is a platform for matching together tutors with students in a sort of massive decentralized way, and the Khan Lab School, which is this brick-and-mortar institution. It's an actual K-12 school that implements a lot of the philosophies that Sal was putting out in the early 2000s. But before we get into all that, a brief message from today's sponsor. This episode was supported in part by Brilliant. And as a personal side note, I actually think Brilliant is an especially good partner for this podcast, because the reason that I decided to start it was to try to do something that encouraged people who are interested in getting started with online explanation. And Brilliant as an organization has actually done way more than most to help support up-and-coming creators. I mean, just as one small example, when I announced the Summer of Math Exposition competition, Brilliant reached out to me and said that they would happily offer $5,000 in prizes to the top entries in that contest, which at the moment I'm thinking I'll split evenly between the top 5 contestants. So Brilliant is a platform where you can learn all sorts of math and science in a problem-driven way. So you come to understand topics like foundational math, relativity, data science, and many more through a well-crafted set of puzzles and exercises, rather than through passive lectures. There are many lessons that are available for free, and listeners to this podcast who visit brilliant.org/3b1b can get 20% off their annual subscription to the full catalog of over 60 courses. So that's brilliant.org/3b1b. And without further ado, my conversation with Sal Khan. It's good to see you. It's actually been, I think, close to 5 years.
I can't believe that. You're aging better than I am.
Well, since we last talked, you've kicked off a number of things, but among them, Schoolhouse.world is a new project to me, at least. Can you talk a little bit about why you started that, what it's all about?
Yeah, from the early days of Khan Academy, this whole project started in 2004 in some ways, with me tutoring my family members. And in 2005, I started making software for them, and that was the first Khan Academy. And even back then, I always had this dream that the website, the platform, wouldn't just be a place to get practice, and eventually we added videos, but also a place for learners to connect with each other. And when I used to tutor my cousins, and we're only talking about, I started with one cousin, and then as you know, word spread in my family, free tutoring was going on, and it became many cousins. I had a little link called Classrooms, and there were 4 or 5 virtual classrooms, and you click on it, we would have a shared blackboard that if one person writes, the other person could see it, and vice versa. And we were using some primitive voice over IP technology to hear each other. And that's actually how I was tutoring my cousins back in the day. And so it's always been in the back of my mind, if there could be a way that we could figure out ways for people to not just learn from a site, but also to learn from each other. When I wrote One World Schoolhouse, I wrote a lot about the power of peer-to-peer learning. I've always advocated that in a classroom setting, the more that we can release the students to help each other, the better. Obviously, not only the student that's learning benefits, but the student teaching benefits a ton. I think both you and I we've almost been indulgent in how much fun it is to teach and how much more you learn when you have to learn to teach other folks. And so when the pandemic hit last year, and Khan Academy usage was going through the roof, but it was also clear that there was a big gap in what has now been called synchronous learning, and people were more socially isolated than ever. And so my thinking was, now or never, let's at least try to create a platform where people can actually help each other. And I did it outside of Khan Academy because Khan Academy team was so focused on so many things. I didn't want to distract it. But we built a prototype last summer. By the end of the summer, we had already had a lot of great successes, and it was already starting to work. Got our first philanthropic funding last fall. And ever since then, actually several states, I think we're at 8 or 9 states now, have signed on saying, yeah, we want to use this as our tutoring platform. There's been interesting aspects of it that where not only can you certify your knowledge to become a tutor, but that certification of your knowledge and your reputation as a tutor is universities like University of Chicago have been using it for college admissions.
You've talked about like different things that credentialing could be in a world where we're a little bit more enlightened about how we teach, and that like tutoring can be a part of that. Like being able to teach is a better demonstration of knowledge than anything. Was that in the back of your mind, thinking that Schoolhouse.world could be just a credentialing outlet that's a little bit better than standardized tests? Or is that more of a happy ancillary accident?
That was not the goal, nor is it the focus of Schoolhouse.world. The real focus of Schoolhouse.world is to get as many people access to high quality human-to-human experiences as possible. And we're continuing to launch things like what we're calling series, which are really multi-session cohorts where you can really form bonds with folks. Now, you know that I also wrote in One World Schoolhouse about the future of credentialing. And I've always thought that, well, the ideal would be some list of the things that you have truly mastered, a portfolio of your work, your creative work, and then some type of reputation, some type of what other human beings think of you. And so there's always been a view that Khan Academy mastery could maybe one day be part of a signal, a new type of standardized signal. I think the traditional standardized signals will always have a place, but there could be a new way where on a platform like Khan Academy, just by practicing and getting feedback, you actually are getting assessment and you're getting standardized assessment. And so if there's ways that you can signal that in a way that's hard to game or cheat, it could be valuable for other folks. And so when the pandemic hit, we also know that a lot of students were having difficulty accessing traditional tests. We know that even grading became weird or inconsistent in a lot of schools. And it was actually University of Chicago that said, hey, couldn't we use Khan Academy mastery somehow as a signal for what students know and don't know? I've always wanted to do that, but the real question is, how do you validate that? How do you authenticate it that it's them and not their older sister doing the work for them? And that's where we realized, well, we were already thinking about using Khan Academy Mastery as a way to certify tutors on Schoolhouse.world. And the way we were doing it was students take a assessment on Khan Academy, which is generated from a very deep item bank, so it's very hard to see many repeat questions. They have to record themselves and their screen while they take the assessment. They have to explain their reasoning out loud orally while they do it. And if they hit the 90% threshold, then they submit that video to Schoolhouse.world. It gets peer reviewed by people they don't know. And if it looks like it's really their work, they got to 90%, they were able to explain their reasoning. We say, yeah, you know that unit. You can go on your journey of potentially tutoring that unit, but it's also an artifact that says you genuinely know that unit. And University of Chicago found it really valuable because more than just a test score, you can click on the link and actually see the student doing that unit. And I think anyone who watches one of those videos of a student performing that unit test has no question about whether they know that material or not.
That's a super good point. But it seems like a kind of like a high human hour cost to review that. Are the peer reviewers actually looking through every minute of the video? And like, what's the typical amount of time that it requires to credential one person this way for the tutoring?
Yeah, there's a process so people don't have to watch the video in its entirety. It really, they just need to scrub to some key moments, sample it 2 or 3 times. The beginning and the end tend to be pretty important, but then sampling in between, checking for any weird edits, things like that. But we found it to be a pretty robust process. And I remind folks, traditional assessment is actually far less authenticatable in a lot of ways, right? In a large university class, they don't check IDs. There's obviously even cases in traditional standardized assessment where which are administered locally, where there's been more cheating than we would like. So there's never going to be a perfect system, but I think the fact that it is peer-reviewed, it's recorded, that artifact is always going to be there, I think are very strong incentives. I don't think anyone would want a video of them cheating out on the internet forever.
Right. That's a very good point. Aside from this fact that it's a good credentialing tool or that it's good for the students who are learning from it, definitely, It seems like there's a lot of other benefits to just tutoring in terms of strengthening your own knowledge, or in the case of like work like yours, where you're actively trying to explain things to others online, where it's not a tutoring session. You're just sitting there as if there's a 2D in front of you. How important do you think that is? Like, do you still actively tutor the same way that you did with your cousins back in 2004? Is that more a distant memory, but you remember the skills necessary to do that when you're there in your office recording a new video?
Yeah, when I record videos, I'm curious what, how you think about it when you do yours, but I definitely think about it the same way that I was tutoring my cousins back 14, 15 years ago. I just try to model what's going on in their mind. I try to model how I sound to the other person, make sure that I'm not talking down to them, making sure that I'm not condescending, at the same time making sure that I'm not using a bunch of shorthand and jargon and skipping steps. I try to be very transparent with my thought processes. I try to, as much as possible, let my true self out, for better or for worse. And one thing you do brilliantly, and I aspire to do as well, is really try to draw connections, things that are little aha moments, things that like, wait, oh wow, these are really the same phenomenon, just expressed in different ways. So yeah, when I make videos, I've met people who have trouble teaching to a computer, but I definitely imagine someone listening when I'm doing it. I have young kids now. Every now and then I still am tutoring folks. I've run a few sessions on Schoolhouse.world. And to your point, there's no better way of learning something deeply than tutoring it yourself.
I mean, I've certainly found this in both when I was at Khan Academy and trying to mimic your style, and actively tutoring someone ahead of time would be beneficial if there was the time, at least pretending that's beneficial. But even for the kind of things that I'll do now, which is, it's scripted. I write a script and it's like I try to produce it and everything. But if I teach that lesson to someone ahead of time, preferably multiple people, invariably it will be more approachable or it will be somehow more engaging. But I actually kind of find it hard to keep up active tutoring in my life, especially during the pandemic and such. Would you recommend to someone they want to make educational stuff online? They may be writing blog posts, maybe they're making videos. Would you recommend making a Schoolhouse.world account or actively trying to tutor in some way? Would that be a strong requirement? You just can't make a good video unless you've done that? Or is it kind of gets you 50% of the way there?
I'm clearly biased, but I think the more that you're able to directly interact with students, the better. I probably don't do enough of it. I'm still kind of, coasting on experiences that I've had in the past. Obviously, I'm the chair and the founder of a school, so I do get a lot of interaction with students there. And at various moments, I've stepped in and done some of the tutoring and some of the teaching at the school. So that's helped me be connected. I don't think it's a must-have. I think there's people who are probably creating great content without having done that tutoring. But to your point, when you do the tutoring, you just get a better intuition for where people get tripped up. I've been surprised while tutoring, things that I don't think are going to be the aha moment sometimes are the aha moment. I was like, oh, let me mention that more. So even in Khan Academy videos, I don't script them, but I've usually tutored or explained that concept to people, sometimes even at a dinner party. And when I see their eyes light up and then when I see them say, oh, wait, I never realized that. I'm like, okay, I'm definitely going to highlight that. I'm definitely not going to forget to say that. So I think it helps to actually tutor.
Pulling specifics out of thin air is sometimes hard, but does anything come into your mind when you're thinking of these aha moments that someone came to that you didn't appreciate but you emphasized more, or struggling points that you found when you were there with a KLS student that changed the way that you made a video?
There's one that immediately came to my mind as an aha moment, although this was probably a self aha moment. But then I've tested it with people at dinner parties, and when they were also similarly aha'd, I'm like, I'm definitely going to include this in a video. I remember when I was doing history videos on ancient India, and I learned just through the research that and this was when I was looking at the origins of Sanskrit and how early philologists realized the connections between Sanskrit, Latin, and German, and realized actually Sanskrit was the reason that they even realized how connected Latin and German were. And in the Vedas, 4,000 plus year old Indian texts, kind of the foundation of Hinduism, the most mentioned deity is Indra. And in the Vedas, in other sources, Indra has a different father, but in the Vedas, his father in Sanskrit is Sky Father. And in Sanskrit, that is Dios Pater, Jupiter, Zeus Pater. So there you go. It's mind-blowing.
That is earth-shattering.
It's earth-shattering. Zeus And I never even made the connection between Zeus and Jupiter. Like, you're always taught that they're the same god, but you're like, no, but it's Zeus Pater, Jupiter. Dios Pater. They're all the exact same entity. And so there's obviously the linguistic connections that made people realize that there might have been this Indo-European group that spread from Central Asia. Some people think they spread from India. Some people think they spread from the Caucasus. But there was actually a religious one. And the religion is alive today in Hinduism, which was mind-blowing to me. And one of my fun things, my family is Bengali, and Bengali is pretty close to Sanskrit. And there's all these words that I'm just used to using. And then I've started look at it and I was like, wait, that's the same word as the Latin word or the English word. Like in Urdu or in Hindi, the word for inside is under. If you say on top of, it's upper. Right? Like, I'm like, wait, they're so connected, but you don't realize it when you're immersed.
Kind of a non sequitur, but kind of related. My favorite one of these is the etymology for the word education and how it comes from educe, like to bring out, as opposed. Yeah, so it shares a Latin root like educare with the word educe. And usually we think of education as like the teacher is pouring knowledge into the student's head. But as you well know, something a lot more Socratic is just more effective where you're trying to pull it out. And the fact that it's already baked into the word that it should be pulling out.
No, there's wisdom in language that I never appreciated.
Yeah. On the topic of KLS and engagement with them, is there anything about actually running that school and realizing how Khan Academy or some of the tools that you've built works kind of on the ground inside brick and mortar that's changed how you either run the organization or changed how you start to make lessons and the platform surrounding it?
I think the big, and I knew this going in to some degree, in the One World Schoolhouse was published in 2012. The last third of the book was what could education look like? And I threw out ideas like more peer-to-peer learning, mixed age classrooms, more student independence and agency, less lecturing and more educare, more allowing students to learn how to learn and pulling it out of them. Even challenging traditional calendars. Why do we have summer vacation? And some people, when they cringe when I say that, they say, no, I'm talking about all year round should be fun, like a good academic summer camp. Why does school end at 3:00 when most families that are two-income families, parents don't come home until 5 or 6 p.m.? Why can't homework happen during the school day if it goes till 6 instead of getting in the way of family connection or sleep, which are very, very important? So there were all these ideas, and it's relatively easy to write down ideas and say, yeah, this is the way it should be. But I knew that, look, it's one thing to write, it's a whole other thing to try to implement it. And so that was the view of KLS. It started about 7 or 8 years ago. We actually had our first graduates, but I think the journey, even though I knew it was going to be tough at times, I've learned a ton. To your question, I learned about just how much, and I knew this to some degree intellectually, but the more that you work with school administrators and the faculty and you realize how complex a teacher's job is, how many tools, it's easy for someone like me to say, more personalized learning. Hey, here, use Khan Academy. Because I'm just thinking about that one lane, that one part of the education experience. But there's so many other factors that I intellectually know about, but when you live it day to day, it becomes much more complex.
Were there any specific moments where you really kind of found yourself stepping back and you're like, wow, I might have bitten off a little bit more than I was comfortable chewing here? Or where you realize like, oh, this is a hard problem that maybe you intellectually knew beforehand, but it like really caused you to take pause?
Honestly, yes. There were many moments like that. I think there's a reality of a school where these are real children's lives as their whole experience that you need to make sure get right. You can imagine the families that are drawn to a lab school, and a lab school that 7 years ago was nothing but a PowerPoint presentation. They're a little bit more adventurous. They're willing to take a little bit more risk. But at the same time, as a parent, you're like, this is my child's future that I got to make sure it's going well. It's a service a job, or it's a service industry, so to speak. You can't just not do it. You got to figure out a way to deliver the service. You can't have a gap in what it's doing, and you got to make sure it's high quality. And at the same time, you have all of these various actors. You have the parents, you have the teachers, you have the students, the administrators, and you got to make sure that they're all in a good place. And especially if you're doing a lab school where you're trying to do change, you're trying to do things that might be a little bit avant-garde, you're trying for everyone to be a little bit out of their comfort zone, it's definitely not easy.
If I think of like the early days of Khan Academy and like the TED Talks that you gave or the book that you wrote, there's a kind of there's an optimism around it and also an ambition, right? There's like, this is what the world could look like, or this is what education could be. And aside from that, I was like, and let's start to build it. Let's actually start to make it. Like, where is your current mind when you're thinking about the next decade or the next 2 decades of education?
I continue to be optimistic, although I have, I think, a better appreciation for the complexity, not, including this complexity of running an organization or multiple organizations, but also how that interfaces with the broader world. When I first wrote Khan Academy's mission statement, it was really, I was just trying to fill out the paperwork with the IRS as quickly as possible so that I could get the not-for-profit status. It was delusional when one guy in a walk-in closet is writing free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And even then I recognize it's a mission. It's not something that you're just going to be able to solve in the next 2 or 3 years. But if you fast forward to now, I think 2008 Sal, or 7 Sal, who was filling out that paperwork, would have been blown away by how far Khan Academy has gotten, and to some degree how legitimate it's viewed, and how we work with systems and how many people are using it. But 2021 Sal, myself, knows that that's nice. 2007 Sal, I know this is getting a little weird, but as many people are using it and as much as we've done, we're still making a relatively small dent relative to the overall issue of we genuinely want billions of people to become actualized in their lives. And I do think that Khan Academy can play a role catalyzing this. In terms of the underlying philosophy around mastery-based learning, personalization, I keep coming back to it, and every now and then there's this temptation to say, well, that's not where other people are. Let's tweak it a little bit to be a little bit more mainstream. And then but then you realize the truth of it over and over and over again. So yes, we are doing things at Khan Academy that help work with a traditional workflow or a traditional classroom that might not be mastery based, because there's still value in using Khan Academy as a supplement, using it as the go-to place for practice, getting immediate feedback, getting micro lessons. So we want to make sure it's used in that way, but we want to make sure also that we never lose our core principle that the ideal is mastery-based learning, differentiation, personalization. I think we have helped put it into the zeitgeist. You hear a lot more people talking about mastery learning and personalization. I think the pandemic has even more people talking about that because they realize that so many kids with unfinished learning or atrophied learning that they might have had during the pandemic, it's not going to be okay. And the statistics, 70% of all kids in America go to community college, have to take remedial math, which is not even algebra. It is usually pre-algebra. So even though they take 7th grade, 8th grade, Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2. Sometimes they take pre-calculus or calculus. They go to college, and the 4-year numbers aren't much better. They go to college, and the colleges say, wait, you have so many gaps, you're not even ready to learn algebra yet. So mastery is, hey, if you're at 80%, keep working on it so that you can get to a better level. Or maybe you move on to the next concept, but at some point come back and review this 80% so you can get it to a 90 or 95 or 100%. That's mastery learning. Traditional learning is you got an 80%, too bad, you're a C student, let's move on to the next concept, somehow expecting you to master it. And we know where that's leading. That's leading to the 70% of kids having to take 6th or 7th grade math, even though they've spent 6 years trying to learn things beyond that.
So I am 100% sold on the benefits of mastery-based learning, and any kind of vision of the future where that's dominant is an incredibly inspiring one. It also seems inextricably linked with a self-paced schedule, right? Because if it's going to be mastery-based, then sometimes you do that faster, sometimes you do that slower. And it seems like that's really the sticking point where just the logistics around actually having a self-paced system and then doing that at scale, it's hard for me to actually be genuinely optimistic thinking that the broader school system, let's just say the public school system in the United States will ever be at a point where each student is genuinely moving at their own pace. But you have a good proof of concept that this can work with the Khan Lab School. Do you think there's any chance that within our lifetimes we could see a major school system across an entire country work in less of a regimented, get everyone through in the same season style and actually allow for individual pacing?
You're right. Right now, I can't point to I can point to entire systems that are using Khan Academy heavily, but not in that in that use case that we just said, where that is the core. We have a partnership with the NWEA that administers the MAP growth assessment, and we've created this thing called MAP Accelerator. And so these are large school districts, places like Clark County, which is Las Vegas, with all their 3rd through 8th graders. Roughly 1 day a week, they are using that for personalized practice. But then the other 4 days, the other 80% is more traditional. We definitely have teachers who are all in. There's a teacher in, I believe, Hesperian, California, Tim Vandenberg, and people can do a Google search to find an interview I did with him. But he teaches kids in the Central Valley of California. A lot of them are children of migrant workers, or definitely first generation in their family go to first generation ESL speakers. And the kids coming into his 6th grade class have historically been 2-3 grade levels behind. And when he did it, he's a great teacher. I think he's like 2nd in the country in Monopoly. So, you can imagine he's an interesting guy. But historically, he showed us the data. He was getting about 1 year of gain for his students in the 1 year that he was teaching them. So it's good in that they didn't fall further behind. But if they started the year 2 grade levels behind, they still were 2 grade levels behind, even though they gained a grade level over the course of the year. He decided about 3 or 4 years ago to go all in on personalization and mastery learning. What he did is he simultaneously had all of his 6th grade students start at early learning on Khan Academy, essentially kindergarten, 1 + 1 = 2, and simultaneously also start on the 6th grade course on Khan Academy, and doing both at their own time and pace. Now, he had the luxury of he teaches all the classes to the students, so he was able to squeeze out some of the other class time so that he could expand the math a little bit so that they would have the time and space to do it. But what he has seen consistently for the last 2 or 3 years is his kids are gaining about 3 grade levels in a year. That the kids, on average, are starting 2-3 grade levels behind, and then by the end of the year, 90% are a grade level ahead, just over the course of 1 year, doing mastery learning, allowing them to fill in their gaps. So when I see things like that, I know it is doable. Now, I can't, I know what the top of the mountain looks like. I can see it. There's a little bit of fog in between. My job, Khan Academy's job, the ecosystem's job is to just constantly try to, climb that mountain, and you don't know exactly the right path. You might have to take some twists and turns, realize that there's a crevice someplace. But I'm confident in our lifetime that we're going to see this become more and more mainstream. I think this is closely tied to notions of competency-based learning. Traditional credentials are based on seat time. In university, it's literally 3 credit hours, right? It's related to how much time it would spend. I think we're going to go to a world, and this goes back to the transcript of the future, where what matters is, do you know the material or not? And I don't care how you got there. And so if you have that, if that becomes what everyone cares about, then that actually facilitates mastery learning. The technology is there. All of the evidence is there.
I mean, when you hear statistics like this, or a story like this where someone goes from 1 year of improvement to 3 years of improvement, just based on switching the method that he's using, do you feel frustrated? Like, do you want to grab someone and shake them by the lapels, or like go into Congress and like ring a bell and just say like, do you understand? This is a literal 3x improvement if we can figure out how to actually make this change.
Yeah. And I mean, the really crazy thing is if you took that 3x improvement for all 12 years of your life, oh God, yeah. Then everyone would be fluent in quantum physics before leaving high school, right?
Yeah, this is where we bring in that meme where you have the city of the future, and it's like, this is what the present would look like if only we had listened to Bloom in 1984.
Yeah, and listened to him, and we invested in building systems that can support it, and not just software systems or content systems, but even administrative systems that support it. I'm happy to do the advocacy work. To your question, yes, I do feel, and I try as much as possible to shout it from the rooftops. But I know that if I just go and shake people, like, look at this, let's do it. Most people, when I show them, when I give a talk, they agree with it intellectually. But then they go back, and then all the different systems which have been in place for hundreds of years, it's very hard to. You can't just move one of them. You have to move a lot of them at the same time. But I'm confident if you get at the right pressure points, the right points of leverage, and I have some theories where they might be, we might be able to crack this. In a world where University of Chicago is using mastery on Khan Academy in order to think about which students are ready to go to a highly selective university. Expect in the next few months, we might announce a few other universities like University of Chicago, maybe even a few that you and I are affiliated with. That is going to send a signal to folks, hopefully, that, hey, this is an interesting way of thinking about things.
So one big part of like the mastery-based system is the notion of flipping the classroom, that you have the means of going online and learning it at your own pace when you need to, which is kind of where the online education component comes in. This is why you were making the videos. And it feels like in the last 10 years, there's just been kind of this huge influx of people who want to make educational material online. And it runs the spectrum between whether it's just some way of being a YouTuber because all kids want to be YouTubers these days, or if it's like teachers that just want to start to publish what their classes are. When you look at this broader space of just like many, many more people putting out educational videos online or blog posts or things like that, is there any way that you think people tend to miss the mark, or anything that like if you could kind of coach them all or just wave a little bit of a magic wand and have people change what they're doing about it slightly, where is it that online education as it stands now, or online explanation, I should say, which is like a different thing, where could that improve the most?
Yeah, I don't pass judgment on anyone on any part of that spectrum. I think hopefully most of them are adding value. I mean, the type of content you're creating, for the most part, didn't really exist in any in that form factor. And so, like, you are inspiring and making connections in people's minds. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point in the future, someone who wins a Fields Medal or a Nobel Prize says, yeah, I never had that connection until I watched a 3 Blue 1 Brown video. And they're like, oh yeah, and then I could apply that to this field. And it's going to happen. I mean, like, secretly, that's one of my dreams, that Khan Academy, someone says, yeah, I was struggling with that, and Khan Academy unlocked me, and then I went off and made this discovery, and therefore cancer is cured. So I think there's a lot of power and value on that explanation side. And a lot of the work that Khan Academy does is in the real, working with districts, running advocacy studies, et cetera, et cetera. But I can't tell you how many people I get, when we do surveys at universities, and 65-70% of kids say, hey, Khan Academy played a meaningful impact on my education. They're usually citing that night where they couldn't get the Krebs cycle, or Taylor series felt impenetrable to them. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, I watched Khan Academy, I did a little practice, and it unlocked me. And then I was off to the races. If I didn't get that, I might have flunked.
So when it comes to like leveraging what people who are making like explanations online are doing into a kind of actual learning, did you ever feel any temptation or pressure to make Khan Academy more of a platform, where, as opposed to it being kind of the cultivated, really high quality lessons that are provided by like you and some of the other staff, did you feel any push to letting it be a bedrock layer for a lot of other people openly uploading?
That was actually my initial thought when
Really?
I was making the software, and then, as you know the story, a friend suggested that I make the videos and upload them onto YouTube, and I thought it was a horrible idea. YouTube's for cats playing piano, dogs on skateboards, etc. YouTube back in 2006 felt a lot like TikTok does today, although I'm now discovering TikTok is actually a great place to educate educate as well. And I made those first few videos just pretty much assuming that the sheer amount of content to be created would need to be crowdsourced in some way. Wikipedia was on everyone's mind back then as like, wow, this worked. Crowdsourcing works, and it can result in high quality things. And so I was making the videos really as a I thought to myself as a proof of concept. I was trying to wrangle other friends into it to start to think about it as maybe we make a bit of a platform here. I think between not being so successful at wrangling other folks in those, at least in those early years, and realizing that the amount of content in these academic areas is actually quite tractable. It's not as large as it might feel. You can do 100, 200, 5 to 10 minute videos, and you kind of cover algebra comprehensively. And in the early days, the early days of Khan Academy, I wasn't trying to cover every single granular standard. Now we do cover every single granular standard. But I saw in the early days, even with 30 or 40 videos, I could give for sure the essence of a lot of mathematics, a lot of science. And so as we went down that journey, and obviously our journeys were connected for several years, I think the realization was that if you get a small number of really high quality content creators, that actually builds trust. It builds a connection between the learner and the teacher. And I realized, in Silicon Valley, everyone's all about platform. Platform is everything. And I realized that, yes, platform matters, but also brand and trust and ethos matters a lot as well. And so there might be a future, and we've definitely theorized. If I had infinite product resources, I would think about having an aspect of Khan Academy that allows anyone to upload or upvote other resources, because there are really good things out on the internet. I could definitely imagine that, but it'll always be, I think, nice to have that core narrative. I compare it to, imagine being in a classroom and every 10 minutes a different teacher walked in. No matter how good that teacher is for that next 10 minutes, if you don't have a connection with them, or if every third teacher is kind of disappointing, you might give up on that class.
And to be clear, I asked the question not implying that the answer should be yes, but it's actually interesting to just hear your thoughts on justifying what I would kind of agree with, which is this sense that like people know your voice, they know the way that you're teaching, and they have this expectation coming in. Even when I was making videos on your platform, the very common initial comment would be like, "We miss Sal," right? Or things like that, because you have built that trust. So I'm just going to say, like, set aside any modesty and like take as a premise the fact that the lessons you make are just really good. They're just better than what most people would do if they were uploading to the site. And maybe one of the reasons to have this sense of brand protection around making sure that it's a smaller group of core people, and especially led by you, is simply that you're doing the lessons a little bit better than the vast majority of people would. What do you think it is that makes them different? I mean, you talked about this a little bit earlier in terms of how you think while you're making a video, but what about the way that you're explaining things do you think has ended up resonating with students in a way that a lot of other people uploading things don't necessarily resonate with the same kind of retention?
Yes, it's an interesting question because as you scale, you always want to be skeptical of, gifts that you might have, or, special secret sauce. But at the same time, as you scale, you don't want to lose it if you had it. And we are, and as you know, we've been trying to scale our content creators. And right now, for example, we're doing a big science push, and we're trying to make sure we have a much more diverse group of voices there. And so we are going through this process right now where we're looking for people who might have potential. They're creating content. We're giving feedback. And it is putting it into sharper focus, where I think the Khan Academy ethos, maybe some things that I brought somewhat organically in the early days, where they lie. I think the big one is a sense of comfort and relaxation and transparency of thought processes. So many people, especially if they try to make a video, they're like, all these people are going to watch it. I can't let every one of my thoughts out. I have to filter them. It has to be like super tight, super professional. But when you do that, it could look professional. And one of my biggest points of feedback, sometimes through the editorial process that we're working on, a video makes it through. And when you look at it, it looks professional. It's tight. The person never says, the penmanship is perfect. They're using good visuals. But I watch it, I'm like, there's something, I'm not with you, or you're not with me. We're in different places. You're not thinking alongside me. And so I think that's one that when people, and it was because I literally, most Khan Academy videos, I am thinking in real time. And so people, I think, feel that. That's not the only way to do it. I think you can make compelling scripts and do it that way. But I think the way that I've definitely come to it is get the ideas clear in my mind, and then try to paraphrase it. So I'm thinking alongside the student. If I'm doing a worked example, be very transparent with my thought processes, do it real time. I tell anyone who will listen, if you're not excited, genuinely excited about what you are about to explain, there's no way that the person who's listening to it is going to be excited. I think the more that you can, just have a little monitor in your head, it's like, okay, your tone, are you sounding condescending? Are you skipping steps? Every now and then I'm recording a video and I say something like, that could be taken the wrong way. So that could make the student think that they're not smart if they don't get this fast. So I'll just stop and I'll start over again to just make sure it's coming from the right place. I think little connections, little ahas, and I don't want to claim that every Khan Academy video has a big aha in it, but if you can connect it, if you say, hey, look, this is just like what we saw before, you can derive this formula. It's always, I know it's probably gotten to you, it's always gotten to me. I saw this with my cousins the early days. How many people think of math as just these disparate formulas that they just have to apply and memorize, and when really it's just a way of thinking, and maybe some symbols to help that thinking be a little bit clearer, or some ways of visualizing it with analytical geometry or something like that. But the teacher might introduce a new notation or a new idea, but you're like, oh wait, this is just like the other one, but now it's just like a sum, but now we're taking infinitesimal sections, and so okay, I get what an integral is. Okay, well maybe this is true as well. I wonder, and if you can do that in life, you're going to be unstoppable. So I try as much as possible to convey that.
I mean, the other benefit of recurringly making those connections, aside from it just being satisfying in the moment, like we have research about how you remember things better if you recurringly revisit that fact. And you've got this kind of exponential decay curve where people get excited about spaced repetition memories so that you can memorize anything you want. But to do it in a less systematized way where you're not like using an app for it, just if the lessons themselves naturally refer back to other things such that they're not disparate, you're sort of baking in the notion of what we know to be the best way to remember things. I mean, so something that like sort of popped into my mind while you were talking about that and like thinking of training new content creators and things is I remember in the cohort that I was there, we were all just terrified to make videos. It was like, partly there's a lot to live up to. And I had this moment when I was sitting, I'm like, okay, just got to actually make a video. And the thing that was liberating was to say, in principle, I could edit it. Like if I make a mistake, I could edit it out. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to make the thing. I'm just going to talk through my thoughts. And like, it's much more comfortable knowing that that could happen. But then upon looking back at it, there's the realization that it's actually a much better lesson if you don't edit any of that out. And somehow this conflict between wanting something to be pristine and like protecting your own, I don't know, sense of authority, and like being able to relax from that actually just ends up protecting that authority much better than anything else because of the transparency you're describing. So as just like a very last question before I kind of wrap things up, when you are coaching new creators or when you're in this kind of like feedback cycle, what are the common things that end up coming up that you find yourself either praising that you didn't expect to, that like kind of comes naturally to people, or where you very often kind of have to course correct to say, okay, this is a common mistake that a lot of people when they're making their first video do, but like you'll get past this and you're able to kind of push them in the right direction. What are those commonly missed points?
Yeah, I think on both sides it goes back to you should have told me back then and I would have given you I was just like, Grant, just do it. Just press record. And I tell that to myself all the time. Even now, I have one or two videos that I'd like to do today, and I've already done a little bit of the prep work for one of them, and there's always this temptation, oh wait, am I ready yet? And I just say, Sal, press record and start, see what happens. You don't have to use this video. And I find when I de-stress myself like that, I oftentimes force myself to smile or laugh before a video. I feel like people are going to sense that. I definitely feel that the energy changes when I do that. Most of the time, yeah, it's kind of good. Maybe I mess up a little bit. I could edit out that 10 seconds. As you know, back in the day, I used to edit out nothing. I used to just do it or redo it. Now I might edit out 10 seconds here or there if I said something that maybe wasn't precise or something like that. But I try to keep as much of the organic nature of it intact as possible. And so the biggest pitfall I see people is falling into is exactly what we're describing. They feel that especially when something is recorded, it's got to be kind of perfect. And the perfect becomes the enemy of the good. Actually, the perfect becomes the enemy of the perfect. They either overscript themselves, they take on a tone that is different than the tone they would use when they're talking to a friend or someone that they are just being collegial with. They optimize for it looking professional, but not really being there with the student. And I, just yesterday or day before yesterday, I gave feedback on a video, and the person who's making, she's incredible. She knows the material back and forth, but I just felt that she edited out a lot of her thought process, and it went fast. I knew the material that she was teaching, and I was just like, it went so fast, I had trouble keeping up. It looked great, but I had trouble keeping up with the thought process. Slow down, be yourself. Be quirky, let yourself go, have fun with it. If you do that, the student's going to have fun with it. I think there's a far larger number of people who can make great videos, but they just don't give them permission to be themselves and to be relaxed when they're recording, or they don't give themselves permission to even just press record and start.
Well, with that, Sal, I just want to say thank you for joining today. And it's very interesting to hear all the projects you're working on. So best of luck with all of them.
Thanks for having me, Grant. And as I always look at 3 Blue 1 Brown and say, well, Grant, he was part of Khan Academy, but now he has done great things. So hopefully you always see yourself as part of this family. You're really one of the folks. I feel like an old person, but yeah, I probably could be your father. But
Many a YouTube commenter thought that you were.
I would have had to have a more exciting life in my my late teens, I believe.
Teenage pregnancies.